We are Myth Vision, home of Myth Vision Podcast and Myth Vision Radio. My co-host is Derek Lambert. I'm Dr. Luther G. Williams, and we're open to this experience of being alive today. We've got a presence on Facebook and YouTube, so we're where you are and you're where we are, and do enjoy today's show, will you? Let it wash over you and bring a smile to you. But first, Derek has got some important information to share. Derek?
It's a beautiful day in January. We're about to head into February, ladies and gentlemen, and that means the seasons are on in action, if you will. So there are some coming attractions on Myth Vision Podcast. We have author and activist David Fitzgerald, who'll be on our next week. It's kind of crazy how one week we have the esoteric mythicist approach, and the next week you got the atheistic mythicist approach. So quite interesting. Some of our listeners will know from his explosive Jesus Mything in Action series. We'll talk to David about that work and much more. You don't want to miss this very special Myth Vision. There's a lot more planned for you, including a newsletter with information on upcoming shows, guest updates on past guests, profiles of explorers, researchers, scientists, scholars, mystics, historians, and of course your input in engaging our guests. So come check us out on Facebook at the Myth Vision Podcast group, as well as the page. And be sure to look for me or Luther. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps us. Like it, hit the bell, and plug this thing out there. A lot of this information is valuable and golden. Luther has a Patreon account as well. He's been putting out a lot of material. So look, if you guys like this platform, simply put, we're bringing you the best we know of in the world today at this moment, guests. And I really just want to say anything helps to help us get this thing going, because it's really self-supporting. Me and Luther are keeping this platform going, and if you think you like this and you want to help, cool. If not, this is there for you to entertain yourself and to educate yourself further. Luther, I can't wait. Please get this guest going, please.
It's a great time for a quantum leap, Derek. An energetic response that takes you to a new level, a higher level. No in-between state. You're just there. And that's where we are with today's guest, Timothy Freke. Tim Freke, as he is known by all of his fans worldwide, is a pioneering philosopher whose best-selling books, inspirational talks, life-changing retreats, and transformative training programs have touched the hearts and minds of literally hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. He's the author of some 35 books, translated into more than 15 languages, including The Jesus Mysteries, which was a top 6 Amazon bestseller and Daily Telegraph Book of the Year. We'll be talking about that book extensively today with him. And in his 2 most recent books, Deep Awake and Soul Story, Tim offers a revolutionary approach to awakening for the 21st century and a visionary new understanding of the nature of reality. He's a keynote speaker at major conferences and is regularly featured in the media internationally, as well as on websites such as Ken Wilber's Integral Naked. He has appeared in the History Channel documentary Beyond the Da Vinci Code, and many of us have seen his face. So when you see Tim, you'll say, wow, I've seen that guy somewhere before. And it could very well be from that documentary. He's also done several other programs about that work, and he's now completely fed up with talking about that damn book. He told me to say that, folks. That's not me. That's his publicist. Tim runs seminars in the United States, Europe, South Africa, exploring the experience of gnosis. Tim, welcome to Myth Vision Podcast.
It's a delight to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, man, we're glad to have you. You know, it's hard to believe that this is the 20th anniversary of the Jesus Mysteries.
I know.
Yeah, you know, unbelievable.
It is.
And many people think that, or say that Christianity came out of the closet with your book. We love it. I love it personally. Think back to the release of that book. How was it received in general, and particularly by the Orthodox community of 20 years ago?
Well, it was an exciting time, Luther, because the book was received very well. I mean, you read out in the blurb about me that we got to number 6 on Amazon on the main list, which was quite something. I mean, that was like, wow, how did that happen? And we were their surprise bestseller, and we were actually kept out of the top 10 in the UK by Monica Lewinsky's autobiography, so we only got to 11. But apart from that, so it was an exciting time. The response was really interesting. You can imagine it was very strong in lots of directions. So a lot of people upset. I mean, we didn't have any death threats, I'm glad to say, but we had an awful lot of after-death threats. There's a little corner of hell that's just put aside from me and Peter Gandy, my friend and co-author, where we're going to be tortured forever by a god of love, allegedly. And so there was definitely that. In terms of the reaction from the scholarly community, I'd have to say at the time and pretty much ever since, it's been a real disappointment. I think because Peter and I were not actually, ever since I left university, I've never wanted to go back. I've always wanted to be working with the freedom that I've got. So we're not aligned with any particular university. So there was a feeling of outsiders, and in theology departments in particular, people are very, or were at that time especially, very caught up with the vested interest, really. The most important thing of all was there is a Jesus, and then we can argue about who he is. So these two outsiders coming in and going, hey guys, what if there isn't a Jesus? It tended to be either dismissed or on the one hand, or very excited. What I was looking for was proper analysis. Oh, I see. This is what's right. This is what's wrong. Because there's going to be things in there we didn't get right. Of course there is, a big book. And that level of peer review was disappointing. I remember Peter, my co-author, going on the Radio 4, with the gentleman who became Archbishop of Canterbury. So it was like, great, they'll have a really good discussion. And what he did was really interesting. He just talked very slowly in a deep voice and basically went, everything's fine. There's nothing to worry about in these theories. These theories have been around for ages and we needn't take them seriously. And that was disappointing. I expected more engagement. But the general public, fantastic. And the flood of emails from people going, thank you, you've set me free from this very limiting view of what Christianity is. That was the greatest thing of all. Wonderful.
Tim, that's amazing you say that, because me and Luther are finding more and more that, yes, there's a place for the academic world, of course, and there's a huge place. I mean, you really want experts to be able to dissect language, to get into these things and really understand a lot of the stuff. But there's such an interpretive method that they bring, and a lot of baggage and a lot of things that they're just limiting themselves. And they're so focused in certain areas, they're not borrowing or communicating with one another. And that's kind of what me and him love doing on the show, is kind of getting the scholars to communicate. You expressed the hope that your book would be a significant call for complete appraisal of the origins of Christianity. And has the world in some sense connected or caught up with what you were saying in that book? Have you seen anything in the scholarly world in any way possibly start to delve into this in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if I look now 20 years later, to stand up and go, I think the Jesus story is a myth, is no longer an outrageous thing to say. In fact, most people will go, yeah, that makes sense. At the time, it was completely outrageous. And there was a feeling of, well, that can't be true. Must be too much evidence. And now people realize there just really isn't evidence for an historical man, and they're able to look at the story through new light, through new eyes, and go, hang on, it actually does sound like it's a myth, doesn't it? Whereas they couldn't do that for some reason. I couldn't do that. I mean, I grew up with it. It was a shock to me when we started working on it. I just, and almost felt like we were going to be struck down for thinking it. It was all very superstitious, really, the state we were in. So, yeah, but now, I mean, there was a Jesus Mysteries group set up online, which was a new thing. It became the biggest group of, I think it was one of the groups on Yahoo, or one of those early things, and it was huge. I mean, it attracted a lot of people and really took off. And so the number of books written on this perspective now have just grown exponentially. I haven't caught up with. I'm way behind all that's been happening, and that's exciting. That's good. And I'm sure, given another few decades, this will really be something which we look back on and go, well, I'm surprised that people ever had any other perspective.
Yeah, you conclude in that book, as many authors say have done since, that Christianity is really a perennial myth that has the power to impart the illuminating gnosis that transforms us into Christ. And what I like particularly like about the myth is that the mythological aspect is just sort of the cup, but the contents is the gnosis. So when you're talking to mythologists, those kinds of scholars, they'll talk about Jesus as a myth, but they'll never talk about Gnosticism as somehow, filling up the cup. Have you gone back to read the Bible from that perspective, or maybe some other texts, and maybe what are some of your other favorite non-scriptural writings in that vein?
Oh my goodness, that's really there's so many, Luther. But what I do feel is that what happened with our work, as you rightly said, what Peter and I wanted to do was go, look, the Jesus story isn't literally history; it's myth, and that's better. And it's better for all sorts of reasons. One of the obvious ways in which it's better is because if there is a literal Jesus, if there was an historical man, then people who believe that are forced to surely realize that the picture they have in their head is probably wrong. Everyone's got a different Jesus. They can't all be right. So probably the person that they're imagining Jesus is not right. He was a very different sort of person. And so it's kind of they're relating to an illusion. However, if you realize, no, the point is that this is a mythic figure through which you transform yourself into the Christ, and you find the gnosis within you, then of course it's very liberating. So for me, the discovery of the Gnostic perspective, that this story is about me and you, it's an allegorical myth, that was just amazing. And then with our second book, Jesus and the Lost Goddess, which was a life-changing experience for me, was doing what the Gnostics said to do, which was like, hang out with these myths and they will transform you. And I went so deeply into Gnostic mythology, man, that it was extraordinary, and what I could, and how deep it went and how much was there. But just to hang it back to the earlier conversation we were having, I would say the book would have done a lot better if we'd been atheists. Or if we'd been against spirituality, because what was about to happen 20 years ago, if you think back, was the explosion of the new atheists. People coming into religion and just going, "No, this is enough. We need a rational scientific approach." And that really exploded. Where people didn't understand me and Peter was we weren't doing one or the other. We were in the middle going, look, this religious literalism is disastrous, but the essence of it, the heart of it, is deeply profound. And that's what made it, I think, very difficult for people to see who we were.
Wonderful.
I find that quite interesting, Tim, and I'm going off the script here for a second because I think this is fascinating, because what you're drawing is not a conclusion on theism, deism, atheism. You are drawing simple principles, and there are foundational things people call spiritual principles that are guide stones in the text that you can experience and know them to be true. Whether or not you think there's a guy on a cloud somewhere pointing down, whether you think there is no guy on a cloud altogether, it doesn't matter. There's something that is true about this that you can experience. And I wanted to ask you, because astrotheology, now I know we're jumping, because astrotheology and synchronistic ideas is syncretism, okay? It all ties in. All of this ties in together, and I find this so beautiful. Like, suppose, because I get where you're going. I know I'm rabbit trailing here, but I know where you're going with the atheistic approach, because, yeah, I see that myself. You've got famous mythicists that are atheists that are getting a lot more limelight than someone who's coming in and saying, look, there might be something. And here's some spiritual truths, and let's delve into this thing in a way that can apply to you. It seems like you guys are in a gray area for them, and the world was wanting someone to come and bash religion and bash these books and bash, which me and Luther don't. We find beauty and we love these texts. And we tell everyone, even our atheist mythicists, the same thing on our show. And they love us, because we love them no matter what. So let me pass the mic to you. If someone does not know or needs textual evidence for astrotheology, your go-to text, where would you take them to go ahead and show them, here is astrotheology in the Bible?
I'm not really the person to ask, about this. I mean, I feel like it's. I mean, I think other people have done much better work on that. I mean, it's there. I mean, basically, the study of the stars and astrology is the main reference point for the whole of the ancient world. And projecting mythological journeys on that is the main point. And we bring out very important things. For instance, just as a little aside, it's very obvious, of course, but the figure of Jesus and the 12 disciples, or Mithras and the 12 around him, it's the same, is the zodiac, is the still point of where the zodiac evolves around. That's the pole star, that's Jesus, he's the Christ, and that's really your own center. So you can see, here's a simple motif which is in the New Testament as a story motif. There's Jesus, there's his 12 disciples, and actually it's referring to an astrological motif, and that is actually in the sky, which is this stillness around which the whole of the night sky seems to be moving, except they don't conceive of it as the night sky as we do. For them, and I love this, and right back to the ancient Egyptians, every one of us is really a star. And I think what that means, once you get over the fact they're not saying we're all big balls of gas exploding in the sky, what they're saying is, from the ancient perspective, they're going, look, they saw the night sky as a canopy. It's Nuit, the goddess Nuit in the ancient tradition. So the whole of the night skies is the canopy, and that canopy is a cave. It's Plato's cave. It's the world of forms in which we're all being imprisoned, in which we're all stuck. And then each of the stars is a hole through which you can see the light beyond, the treasure house of light, the realm of the mystery, the Father, God. So each one of us is a hole in the canopy of form. And I love that, because when I look at you and I see literally, I look in your eyes and literally a hole, and then through that hole, which is form, I connect with something I can't see, which is conscious being looking back at me. And that's what they're really pointing out. They're pointing out, that's what we really are. So the whole of the Jesus myth, actually, I think, is the journey right from the star at the beginning, where this figure of Jesus comes into the cave, Plato's cave, and right the way to the end, where Jesus is found, the cave is empty because he's resurrected. And they say, and if you think about it, they said at the time when he resurrects, they say that the veil of the temple was ripped in two. And the veil of the temple at the time was a tapestry of the night sky. It was an astrological symbol. So the night sky is ripped in two, the veil, Nuit, the goddess form. Goddess is the form. God is the mystery from which everything arises. That's the fundamental polarity. God, if you like, God is the dreamer of the dream of existence, and the goddess is the dream. She's all the forms. So we're trapped in the cave. He comes through, he rips through, he comes out. As Paul says, he conquers the cosmos, and he goes through to the treasure house of light. And that's where it's going. That's the resurrection, and the tomb is empty. And I love that. And it helps me understand Plotinus, the great a pagan philosopher, Neoplatonist philosopher, who's around at the same time as the Gnostics. He's a kind of competitor. And when he's talking about the Gnostics, he says, in the matter-of-fact way, of course, really, like everyone else, they're just teaching the ascent from the cave. So for him, Christianity is the ascent from the cave. And you look at that and you think, well, no one said that to me at Sunday school. What does that mean? And then you get, that's what it means. It means it's about us being incarnated into form, and just seeing what the form and not seeing the essence, which is invisible. It's the spirit, it's the essence, and waking up to that. So I think the astrology and is absolutely embedded all the way through the story, and you can there's just more and more of it to discover.
Tim, let's take a question from one of our loyal listeners. This is from Joy Taylor Ackerman of Orlando, Florida. And she would like you to help us understand your theory of time as a philosopher. Her question is, she starts with this observation. She says, in regards to Tim's theory of time as accumulating and not passing, but as time accumulates with each new moment, it intersects with the potentiality of another new moment. Is that a correct understanding? That's what she asked. So keep that in mind first. And so her question is, how do you see the consciousness of God being outside of this time dimension? And if it is so, then would our individual God consciousness have the potential to access knowledge of the future the way we can be certain about knowledge of the past? Joy, thank you for your question.
Okay, Joy, that's a big question. All right. So I think to give it some context, as we're going to jump from my work 20 years ago to my work today, what I've been doing since the Jesus Mysteries is, in effect, although I don't always use this language because it can be off-putting, but in effect what I've been doing is creating a Gnosticism for the 21st century. At a certain point, I realized I wasn't so much interested in just writing about what Gnostics did 2,000 years ago. I wanted to do now what they did 2,000 years ago. And what they did was they took the spiritual works that they inherited and created them new for their own time. So my deep passion really is to create a new Gnosticism, a new way of understanding what this is. And that won't be the same as the old Gnosticism. It needs to move on. But there will be important things in it which are the same. And this thing that Joy's talking about is central to my new philosophy, and it is different. So a lot of my method philosophically is to look at the moment and just see what I see. And the more I meditate on the moment, the more it reveals to me. And I've done that with time. So the basic idea, if I put it very quickly, if I put it quickly in time, is when I look at the moment, what I see is a flow of appearances. I see a flow of experiences, and that's time. So when I hear people saying time's an illusion, which I hear a lot, I've probably said it myself in the past, I now don't know what that means, because it feels to me that actually we are experiencing time. We only experience time. There is no experience apart from time. One thing follows another. That's always the way it is. So even to understand the sentence, time is an illusion, takes time. You can't even understand it as an idea without time. Everything is predicated on the fact that things move through. And for me, when I look at it, I notice two qualities that has. And one is that every new moment manifests a new possibility. Always. There's never been two moments the same. It's always like a new, this one's new, this one's new. That's the first thing I notice. So it feels to me like, that's something about the nature of reality here. Reality is the realization of new potentials all the time. That's what it is. And then I notice something about the past, which I find fascinating, and it may be this that she's referring to, which is that every new moment contains within it, implicitly, everything that's ever happened before. This moment now, this contains you inviting me on, it contains our previous conversation, it contains us learning to speak English, it contains the evolution of the human species, it contains everything. And without all of that, this moment would not be this moment. So each moment seems to me the coexistence of the past and the possible. And the past is not going anywhere. It's accumulating. The past doesn't pass. It actually accumulates. There's just more and more and more of what has already been realized. And then based on everything that's been realized, we can realize a new possibility. So that's the basic idea, which I find fascinating. And I think there's a lot there, of course, you'd go into. But just very briefly in response to Joy's questions about God and, well, these are big questions. There, in this moment, what seems to me, there is the stillness of my deep self, which is timeless, which is always now, and then there's this flow of time. And the two coexist. That's the first thing. But I do not think that the stillness contains anything but presence. It's just being. It has no other qualities. So out of time, there is no qualities apart from being. That's the eternal quality. So when we come to talking about seeing the future, this thing, time is illusion, the future already exists, it sounds attractive to people. I know it does. But I have to tell you honestly, Derek and Luther, I hate that idea. With a passion. I hate it. It's a horrible idea. The future's already happened. So this conversation is meaningless. It's already happened. All our struggles in life, all of our joys and sufferings, all of our attempts to grow and learn and become wise or love, it's all irrelevant because it's all just mapped out. There's no creativity in the world. Nothing has any meaning. I hate that. And I don't think it's true. My whole experience of the depths of life is it's full of creativity, and that you don't know what's going to happen next, and that you play a part in what's going to happen next for yourself and for everyone. It's creative. You take the past, you can't change that, and you create a new possibility. So that's my first thing. And then very, very briefly with God, which is another huge thing. For me, one of the things I wanted to switch around, the Gnostics came in and created a whole revolutionary new idea of God. We lost this awful figure of Yahweh, this ghastly tribal thunder god, and they replaced it with something utterly revolutionary, which was a God of love. I mean, that's, wow, what a whole new thing that was. And we're still trying to catch up with that, with the idea that God is love, we can love our enemies. Wow, what a line that is. This is whole new stuff. What I want to do is push it even further, because it seems to me the problem the atheists have with God is, and I agree with them, is that if you take the figure of a super mind or a great being or whatever you want it to imagine as, and you put it at the beginning of time as the creator, or even as the mind that's dreaming the existence of God, that God is kind of crazy and mean, I think, because it takes a crazy God to create 165 million years of dinosaurs, doesn't it? If you want to get to human souls and transcendence, and 165 million years of dinosaurs, that's insane. It's insane. And of course, all the classic problem of evil, all of the suffering, all the terrible suffering, which is nature is predicated on. So this God, if he's at the beginning, he's mean and insane. And as a good Gnostic, I want to go up to him and go, I want words with you. What have you done creating this shithole? I'm not having it. That was the Gnostic perspective. What I want to go is, but actually, I don't think God is at the beginning of time. I think God is not where this has come from. I think this being of love is where it's going. I think we're evolving towards God. I think the universe is giving birth to God as this being of love. And that as we awaken, so it awakens. And that is the very process of time, taking us further and further towards this transcendent conscious oneness, which is love.
Oh my goodness. Joy, we're going to have to talk, Joy. You just tore me up. I had an excellent question, and I want to run into that. I just want to briefly say I was a Reformed Calvinist, and so that predestinarian concept of absolute, I've lived with that kind of philosophy in my mind, and it really didn't do anything. The only satisfactory point was that I knew God won in the end, and it didn't matter what happened in between, because in the end he wins, and I'm on his team, and so that was the only positive.
That's like the worst action movie you've ever watched.
So that was kind of, I like what you're saying, and I agree with that. Totally agree with that today. I would not have agreed with you 8 years ago, and I'm thankful my eyes were open and I woke up. Really am thankful that something happened. I wanted to ask you something. I'm getting off script again because I feel like this question is extremely vital. So many atheist mythicists and historicists, and your scholars today are arguing over the existence of Jesus. They're so focused on, did he exist? Did he not exist? And it seems like you have left that box altogether, and you said, hey, look, I don't even see that as why are we talking about that? Let me exit this Jesus discussion on whether he existed and didn't. And my question is to you, and it might be a little bit difficult. I don't know. I hope it's not. Who is Paul's Jesus? Because we know scholars, they date him early. The Gospels come later. Who is this Paul? Is he a Gnostic? And who is his Jesus? If you don't mind giving me something on that, please.
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, I have, Derek. I lost patience with it about 10 years ago. It was like, I just can't go through this anymore. You know, and honest to goodness, it doesn't really matter to me. You know, what is for sure is the gospel, the Jesus of the Gospels did not exist. Was there someone underneath there somewhere? I don't think so. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest there was. Everything about the Gospels is mythic. We've seen the story evolve, but if there was, there was. I don't know. Would I like him if I found him? Maybe. I don't know. But somebody wrote these great Gnostic tracts, you know, whether we're talking about Simon Magus or Basilides or Valentinus or whoever it was. And these, it's like looking at the works of Shakespeare. They're a genius. There was no Hamlet, but the works are genius. Yeah. And it's the same with this. You know, there was no Jesus, but the works are amazing. And so my feeling with Paul is, there's the book I would recommend, funnily enough, I've just done it to someone just before I spoke to you, is the Elaine Pagel's book on the Gnostic Paul, which I think is excellent. With Paul, I think there's two Pauls. There's the historical Paul, who writes some of the letters we have, who writes in the Greek of the ancient Greek mysteries, who never talks about anything to do with an historical figure, who says that the Greek secret that's been stored up from the beginning of time is the Christ in you, and who sees Christ as someone you die and resurrect with. He is the great hero of the Gnostics. Valentinus, for instance, says that he received the gnosis from Theudas, who received it from Paul. So this is a direct walk. This is a direct run through historically. So he's the great hero of the Gnostics, which is why I think by the 2nd century you get a whole different Paul, and that Paul is anti-Gnostic. He's the one who writes about gnosis, falsely so called, and tells women they should wear hats in church. The Gnostics, of course, are well known for their radical approach to women. You know, they're like the Pythagoreans. Well, they are Pythagoreans, really, who treated women as equals, which was, I mean, unheard of. And one of the great things which the Roman Church will later attack Gnosticism for is that they have Gnostic priests, they have Gnostic bishops who are women. And fascinating, you know, we have a whole list of texts, most of which we don't have, but a list of Gnostic texts, which is in the work of Celsus. And I think it's all of them, actually. I mean, it's a lot of them are all credited to women. I mean, probably mythical women, but women. So you've got this very radically different Paul. You've got this literalist, not very pleasant Paul. And his job is to try and destroy the real Paul. And those letters turn up in the 2nd century with Irenaeus, who is one of the proto-literalists. He's also the person who starts putting the Gospels together, takes the 4 that could possibly be saying the same thing, because they look as if their stories, misses out all of the mythical ones which are doing the rounds, and gives us what we now call Christianity. He's the person, and we're endlessly arguing about these 4 books. And if we just put them in the context of all the other Gnostic books we have at the time, the argument would finish. There'd be no argument, would they? Because they're clearly mythological. But we don't know much about Paul. Most of the stuff we think we know about Paul is later stuff and shouldn't be taken seriously.
Right. So the things that come along later very often are designed to contradict some of what was posited earlier. The flow of time in this is fascinating. And Tim, the fact that you and I stepped into this dimension of existence in the same year, 1959, and I'm going to take you back a little further back than that, about 15 years, the mid 1940s. You know, the world at war. And here we are, 20th century, but yet, you know, we're aping our ancestors with stone knives and bear skins. And here in the middle of this is plopped the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library. Fantastic. Yeah. You know, within 5 years of one another. So think about that. And compare, if you will, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library to that of the Dead Sea Scrolls? We've had quite a lot of time to work with those collections of text now. Why is it, you think, that the Dead Sea Scrolls have received the lion's share of attention? Or perhaps you don't agree with that. But it seems to me that they have. Are the politics behind the two collections perhaps different? And how would you compare the ultimate value of those two collections, the Dead Sea Scrolls for Judaism and the Nag Hammadi Library for Christianity?
Well, the Nag Hammadi has received an awful lot more of my attention, so I know it much, much better than I do the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I'm a biased witness to this. Has it received less? The Nag Hammadi received less attention? Probably yes, because it's challenging. I find it amazing as a curious human being that it's not a permanent bestseller. Not because it's such a great book, because a lot of it is really quite difficult to read, to be honest, and very strange, and some of it's beautiful and some of it's not. It's a library, and books are, you know, various quality. But it's about Christianity. And some of the books there, you know, contains the words of Jesus, allegedly. You know, the voice, the mouthpiece for the wisdom is the figure of Jesus. So why every Christian in the world hasn't just gone, at least, and bought the Gospel of Thomas and gone, wow, there's another gospel being found. Fantastic, let's read that. But they haven't, because they're told not to. And that's why I think the Nag Hammadi is more important, in my view, because it is relevant to the tradition which has dominated Western spirituality and the Western soul for 2,000 years. And it casts it in a whole new light. And in that way, it's got to be one of the most significant archaeological finds of all time. What a shame that so much of it was burnt to keep a shepherd warm at night, because you'd love to get your hands on that. And God bless Carl Jung for being able to get his hands on it and to look after it for us. Right. And to be wise enough to know that the Gnostics had something, that the Gnostics were, as he said, proto-psychologists, and that they were doing something to do with the nature of the soul and the unconscious, which he was picking up in his reinvention of Gnosticism 2,000 years later.
I'm extremely fascinated at this. I mean, you know, I'm a recovering addict myself. And, you know, when I was reading about this recovery process and these 12 steps, quite interesting they use 12 steps. I almost think, because going back to some of the history in the 30s, since we're talking history, these guys, Bill and Bob, who started AA, okay, they were in communication with people who were in communication with Carl Jung. Carl Jung had brought some of this philosophy to the table, as well as the Oxford group where they got some of this material from. And so they come up with this conception of a higher power of your own understanding. Whoa, you heretics, you better chill with that, right? So I still use that. And, you know, I've tried, I'm being absolutely honest on a personal level, I have tried religion to escape. And I've always found myself wanting. And here I have literally just surrendered to the now, to the present, and to the I am just a human. I am fickle. I am not perfect. I don't know what to do. I cried out to something inside of me. I didn't look up to a cloud. I didn't ask the grandfather up there in the sky somewhere. I cried out inside of me, and this thing came true for me. And so your writings, your literature, your lectures, it seems to me is revolutionary, and it's all about finding the God within. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, Derek. I mean, for me, that's the gnosis. The gnosis, I mean, I presume most of your listeners will know gnosis means knowledge. It means knowing. In the mystical sense, it's a Greek word. And so the gnosis is knowing your own deeper self. And as Clement of Alexandria says, when you know your own self, you know God, because they're the same thing. So what you have there is the idea that the Christ is the Christ in you that we were talking about earlier, that Paul talks about, that it's all about discovering that. I think that's the same as what in the Hindu tradition is the Atman, or in Buddhism is the Buddha nature. And it's the idea that my deepest being is one with the being of all. So that although Tim is a unique soul, his spirit, his essence, his being is one with all being. And that oneness of all being is what you could call God. So that the whole journey of Gnosis is for your particular soul. And let me just say this, one of the things which I love is really getting, and this was huge for me with writing Jesus and the Goddess. It was a breakthrough moment because I had to sit down and there was all these terms, pneuma, spirit, psyche, psyche, soul, physis, body, and so on. I was like, what are they talking about? And I'd written books already, quite a few, and I didn't know. I'd never thought about it. It was like spirit, soul. Are they all the same thing? Are they different? What's the difference? Do you have one of each? And actually to go into it and go, oh my God, these people are talking about the obvious in a very profound way. So that we're so used to these theological concepts, we don't see what they actually mean. So what I see now is, I'm obviously a body and a soul, because the body is the physical, here it is my sensation, and the soul is the psyche. I'm also experiencing a non-material world, I'm always experiencing that, of the imagination. And it's full of images, and they don't exist in space, and they're not made of matter. So I'm both material and non-material. Everyone is. You can't possibly miss that. It's so obvious. You're a body and a soul. No one could disagree with that. It's obvious. And then there's spirit, which is essence or being. Essence from esse, to be. It's your being. And I think what they're saying is, look, there's a flow of sensation, which is your body. There's a flow of imagination, which is your soul. And then there's the presence that is experiencing that. And that's your being. And the thing which is your being is something, well, let me quote the Gospel of Thomas. In the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is revealing the Gnosis, he says, I will show you what you cannot see, what you cannot hear, what you cannot touch, and what you cannot imagine. And that spirit, and it's not because it's difficult to imagine, it's because it's the thing which is experiencing the imagination. It's not that it's difficult to see, it's the thing that's looking. And the thing which is looking doesn't have a shape or a color. The things you're looking at have shapes and colors. The presence that's looking has no shape. It makes no noise. It is complete. It has no qualities other than, as it says in the Cloud of Unknowing, the medieval Gnostic text, it's a naked sense of being. There's in one of there's a one called The Stranger in one of the old Gnostic texts, where the goddess is revealing the Gnosis to the seeker. And she says, put your attention to the rear of your experience. So you're come back before your experience. So what's the experiencer? And that is that's what's meant in the ancient world by contemplation. It's that you're putting yourself back into this presence, which is witnessing everything and has no qualities except being. And when you do that, what arises is this enormous oneness, because you're one with everything. Tim's not one with everything, but my deep being is one with everything. And Tim sees that. And what arises with the oneness is agape, this tremendous love, because love is how the oneness feels. When you realize you're one with someone or someplace, anything, it feels like love. That's what love is. It's connection. So when you come back into the presence of the Christ or your deep being, there's this oneness, and then there's this love which you can even love your enemies. It's a love which loves everything just because it is. And that's what the whole game's always been about. That's what happened to these people 2,000 years ago. That's why they created all of that. And that's what can happen to us today. It is happening to us today.
It is indeed, and it's all existential. You have to experience it in order to understand it. I come from the Orthodox Christian perspective, being a Christian minister even to this day, and the Methodist tradition. And you talk in your book, The Jesus Mysteries, about mystery initiations and the revelation in the dance. And I just take that as an example of all these kinds of modes of reality that have to enter into our being so that we can learn from them. They to put them in the mix. And I look at the dryness of our church services and ways to restore some of that, particularly in the number of voices and the types of voices that are present during those times that we call worship. And at the time you were writing the Jesus Mysteries, I was traveling to Guatemala, where Christians sing the Psalms of the Bible. You're familiar with the Psalms, many of them written by David.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, I've sung them myself.
Yes. And it opens up a whole nother dimension, because, as you know, the songs are the songbook of Israel and should almost always be sung. So I remember coming back to the United States and saying, okay, well, as a step toward getting in touch with the entire memory theater that was the early Christians' experiences, we're going to sing the Psalms. Are we moving toward that, toward more dimensions of expression in our acts of, shall we say, worship? And is that a revolution or an evolution?
A bit of both, I think. I mean, I hope so, Luther. I think so. I think what's happening, I think there is a revolution happening in consciousness. How quickly it's going, hard for me to say. The people I meet are amazing, but I watch the news, it doesn't look good. So, which is probably a bit of both. So my sense is what that revolution is well, what Derek said earlier, you know, that we can approach the higher power in whatever way works for us. That's a huge revelation, and a very Gnostic thought. You know, there's a lovely, I think it was Irenaeus, who we mentioned earlier, this literalist bishop, complaining about the Gnostics, going, the trouble with the Gnostics is each one of them seems to have to invent their own myth before they're properly recognized as initiated. So it's like, he hates that. They've all got their own story. What the hell? Whereas that's, of course, the whole Gnostic point. It's like, be yourself. If you can't describe the gnosis back to me in your own way, you haven't found the gnosis.
Right.
You're just parroting somebody else. But the minute it's your own way, you've got it. I've seen, you know. So that's happening. That's happening, and hurrah for that. And I think, you know, the revolution that started in the 60s has been a big part of just going, look, I think that's the Dionysian thread has come back, that sensual, embodied passion. And I like that too.
Well, Tim, we're coming to the end of this show right here. I am in awe of what you said, because it's my experience as well. It's not just that it makes sense. I've looked at this and I've been investigating this for some time, but I actually experience what you're saying, and so does Luther. How do our guests get a hold of your works? What's the best way to reach you or to get your materials, whatever you have available?
Well, the best way is on my website, timfreke.com. You have to remember that my name is pronounced Freke, but spelled Freke. It's an old English name. But I'm easy to find on the internet because it's such a weird name. And the Jesus Mysteries is the one if you're interested in the historical Jesus. The next one is the Jesus and the Lost Goddess, which I've got here. I can show you that one, which is this one, which is really about what the myth means. So the more esoteric side. And then there's others as well. If you're really up for it, one of my favorite books is The Gospel of the Second Coming, which is my naughty book. It's a very, very naughty book. You should not read it if you're easily upset. But it came from this was me and Peter many, many years after the Jesus Mysteries. When we first put out the Jesus Mysteries, we really tried hard to appear like serious scholars because we wanted to be taken seriously. But after a decade or more, we just couldn't be bothered with that anymore. We just wanted to have some fun. So we wrote a new gospel. We did what the Gnostics did. We wrote our own gospel in which Jesus comes back to explain he doesn't really exist. And that freaking Gandhi had got it right in the Jesus Mysteries, and then put all of the great ideas in the Jesus Mysteries into a new gospel, except with jokes. So I think my privately, the thing I'm probably most proud of is that for a little while there was big posters on the London Underground, you know, the metro, with a picture of that book, The Gospel of the Second Coming, and the slogan in big writing by its side was, Jesus is back, but this time he's funny. And That was great. So there's all of that. Then there's all my new work. The stuff about time is in the book called Soul Story. It's all on my website. There's an online course you can get on the philosophy. I'm going to be launching a lot of new stuff. So sign up to my newsletter and you can hear about that. And I am coming to America in March to run events in Encinitas, 2 in San Francisco, 2 in Boulder. And then I'm coming back to the Omega Institute near New York in June to run a whole retreat. So if any of this fascinates you, you can also contact me, Facebook, all the usual things.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tim. Ladies and gentlemen, check the description out. You'll find his website. It'll be the first thing there in the description. Just click it, like it, and check out his materials. This is amazing. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for the next episode with Tim Freke and Myth Vision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert, co-host, Dr. Luther G. Williams.